My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piranyo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to continue from the last time we covered dualism, but it's going to be a short presentation today or short discussion today. But I'm going to then get you to start thinking about all the rituals that we have been doing in all our practices, how to translate the rituals into introspection. That means from the achara to the vichara, and how do we see things in a more deeper way. Oftentimes we are thinking we have been taught to understand some things, read, follow. Sometimes we don't get the full understanding, and sometimes when we ask the people that have asked us to do this, we may not get a clear answer. So we're going to give some tools for you to start thinking about, okay, I've been told this. How do I use my mind more carefully, my intellect, to introspect deeper, contemplate, reflect, and meditate? And more importantly, how do I see the relationship between the rituals? And from the rituals, how do I make sense of the three things, which is God, nature, and myself? And if you start exploring in deeper, you'll see that you start forming that connection, and you'll understand there is a connection, and then you'll understand that as you go deeper, the connection becomes more and more closer and more tighter. And finally, there comes a stage of convergence. And what happens during the convergence stage? And finally, when you become converged, this notion that we always hear called samadhi, sama adi, being one. What does that oneness means? What are the experiences one gets? And to do that, one needs to understand, the whole concept of God, nature, and also our own self. So this is what the religious, and this is what all the schools of thoughts, dualism schools of thought, it varies. Some have a very strong view, others are more, liberal, and there are a lot of schools that are between the two, hybrid. So we covered the last time these concepts where we saw there are stages of development where initially we can't make sense of this. There's no connection. But then we start seeing the schools of thought say, hey, there is a connection between God and nature. And we know that there are things that we can experience as a sentient being. We observe the nature around us. We experience nature. We see nature, but we don't know what is behind nature, what's causing this, and so on. And oftentimes, this forces of nature that we cannot understand, we call it, we call this as something far beyond, and we give it as a name of God and supreme personality, and so on. As we go deeper and deeper, we see that we see there's a connection between what we call nature, what we call God, and us. And we covered this the last time. And through intensive bhakti and grace of God, one who has bhakti gets that grace of God. What does that grace of God means? There are many ways one can look at it. Some would see that grace of God is that the ability to understand, the ability to experience, the ability to be one with God. So, and there is a stage that one goes through. First thing is that you didn't understand before. Through bhakti, you acquire the grace of God, means you have a little bit more sublimity, calmer and cooler, that gives you a little bit more clarity. The clarity leads to more intensity, and that leads us to this path where we have greater understanding of the forces around us, the forces within us, and also more importantly, we understand that there is we are part and parcel of this gross body that is impacted by cause and effect, and there is some component or some substratum within us that is transcendental to it. And we see that slowly, our mind that is caught up in this material world, which is impacted, the material world goes through cause and effect. A mind that is close to the material world is also impacted by cause and effect. Or when the mind starts decoupling from, decoupling from the material world, the mind slowly has its own identity, and it is not impacted so much by the material world's movement. And as the mind gets drawn by that substratum called soul or God, which is transcendental, the mind becomes more and more transcendental. And we start seeing that convergence starting to play. So we saw this, and if you read many great saints and sages, they will actually tell you these experiences that they go through. Even Mahan, you see that he went through this experience of everything coming to make sense, and there was a convergence that was taking place. So we see that, most ancient beings, the first thing we observe is this, right? And this is what most, biological species, they are aware of their own, consciousness. Sometimes it's instinct driven, and sometimes it is, the environmental that drives this. And this is what all human beings, in the early phase was, we are aware that our existence is there and survival was the most important thing, and it's instinct driven. And as we became more and more intelligent, as I mentioned earlier, that we became more strategic, we became more clever in, understanding the forces around us, managing the forces, and slowly, we started asking questions: where does this force come from? And this is where we understand all this is nature. We are part of nature, and nature is part of the grander, grander cosmos, or what we call the, um, you know, uh, infinite substratum, formless, dimensionless, and sometimes we call it infinite, and Mahan calls it Irul. You see, so many people have called this by different names. But whatever it is, what was separated actually is, you see that it's a subset. So some scholars would argue that we mortal beings are a subset of nature, and nature is a subset of God. So we are encompassed by God, and as our mind becomes more and more aligned, we see that we realize that the mind for someone who is just a sentient being, biological being, is caught in this smaller circle. But through introspection, contemplation, reflection, we realize that we are part and parcel of nature. Our mind expands, and ultimately our mind becomes formless and dimensionless. And that requires intensive introspection, contemplation, reflection. So some scholars believe that we can get the grace of God. We can, experience the grace of God, but we cannot be God. We are a subset of God. Others take it a slightly a different. Others say that you can push it even further, because if that divinity is part of our DNA and we are all a manifestation of that, then we should be able to then slowly see this identity where the sentient beings, nature, and God are part and parcel of one full substratum. One has one has form, the other one is formless part of that. And you see that some scholars will say, look, we are we are manifestation of this God. So slowly you see that the dualism starts, becoming that oneness. And finally, ultimately, you see that, this notion of everything is God. And this notion of I God comes in. So some would take the view that, everything manifests from God. And we take the forms in the form of nature and sentient beings. We create our own identities in this four-dimensional universe to exist in this four-dimensional universe. And we are part and parcel of this universe. And interestingly, this is, so you see that we see ourselves first, we understand nature, and then we see God. But what is really interesting is that if I roll this back, um, everything starts with God. It gives form, it gives, creation, and then it gives form. So oftentimes we start with ourselves, then only we think about nature, and then, but actually we see that this comes from this Urul substratum, and that it manifests as different things. This reminds me very much of the chariot model that we covered, and we think it starts from the ride or the chariot itself, and we see that we are carrying a passenger. When one really introspects, contemplates, reflects, and meditates, we see that the passenger is the most important entity. The passenger is what gives rise to everything. And we see in this same context, the ultimate, dualism is that uh, God and me are separate. I attain the grace of God. And a more liberal perspective is that I become, as I get the grace of God, as I get the grace of God, God, nature, and myself becomes one. I become one with God. So this whole notion of, if you see in some scriptures, it says very clearly, through me you attain God, and you attain eternal life. And basically, what it's saying is that through the mind absorbing in the state of godliness, one attains that God consciousness or God realization. So we see this in many scriptures. We see this in many great saints who starts off with rituals, intensify, and then eventually that exploration turns within, and ultimately they come to a state of samadhi. This samadhi is being one with the original state of existence. So then we have a few, so this evolution is what's captured here, which is this ultimate state of achieving this state of union. If you see in most yoga means union, to be one with, and this is what this state gives us. So we see that to attain that state, one needs to intensify that introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, which is not very common, not something that most people do. Most people follow things, they're good followers, but very rarely that they, ask, why are we doing this? What's the purpose of this? What is the meaning of this? And if you know the meaning, then the rituals become more meaningful. The rituals then becomes a source of discipline, a source of focus, a source of consistency, and finally it leads to this understanding of who you are finally. And the interesting thing is that you will realize that when you practice this, the material world, that material life that you lead, and also the spiritual realm that you are part of starts converging. And when that convergence starts taking place, you see something very interesting happens. Whatever you experience, this blissful divine experiences, starts manifesting in every facet of your life. Though there may be challenges in the past, you try to avoid challenges, you try to do things to ward off challenges. Now, when you're in the state of absorption, when you're in state of this convergence, um, you don't see challenges, the way you used to see. You see challenges as a source of inspiration, source of learning, and source of enlightenment. So, and also sometimes, we start, having this mindset which is much more expanded, that sees everything as one. And this is what the meaning of samadhi means. It means that neither sukha nor dukkha impacts you. So your mind doesn't fluctuate up and down. Your mind is in the state of samattuam. And you see that the samattuam leads to this samadhi state. Samattuam, does not mean running away from your material life. Samattuam means to be bringing it in union with the divinity that you are imprinted with. And this is what you see in all the scriptures. They talk about, you know, when you give up this body, as you become more and more introspective, you move to different planes of existence. The different planes of existence, you know, some would say, you know, heavenly experiences. Others will say the different planes of experience is that the different levels of one's mind moving up this, what I call the value chain, or moving up this state of enlightenment. At every step as you move up, you get a new set of bandwidth and you know depth of understanding, that you get this, wow, this is great. So you got, every moment becomes a wow moment, and you feel so exhilarated, so you know inspirational and so blissful. And we see this in many great saints and sages' life, many scientists, many living people who practice this. They say, wow, you know, life is really awesome, you know. And even though they may, you know, the body is starting to disintegrate because of disease, they still are very blissful in their outlook of life. So this is what we see, that the convergence. So I don't see the dualism as you know, there's a subtle difference, but you know, we see that ultimately it leads to this notion of attaining grace of God. Attaining grace of God means becoming one with God, attaining the Samadhi state. So, so again, you'll see that through Mahan's teachings and understanding, one will see that there is very, very small, very minute differences, which is negligible. Ultimately, the goal is still the same. So, having said that, I just want to then go to the question. So, I want to let you think about this, but I'm going to give you some examples of how one would have to think about the rituals and the acharas to vichara. I gave you some examples the last time of how prayers is done. And if you see, if you observe, most organized religions would give a lot of focus on this. You know, some will put vibhuti, some will put kumkumam, some will put, you know, the if you go to certain religious belief, they touch there, then they have sign of, you know. So this third eye is very important. Pretty much most organized religions give focus to this. So this is very important, because this is also a point where we see that, you know, when you practice this third eye, your concentration improves. When your concentration improves, what happens is that, what do we mean by concentration? It means that we are focusing on something and putting everything else in the background. So how does that happen? So what's the science behind this? Our mind is organized, you know, our brain is organized in such a way that it's got neural connection. It's like highways, so many pathways. But because the mind is thinking so much of the material things, the neural pathway is all fully busy and excited and so on. And so sometimes we have so many thoughts that the thoughts don't have that sharpness nor the depth. Right? Because our brain has got so much energy, only limited energy. It's got to, all that information that is coming, it needs to process all of them. So it, you know, coordinates and provides an adequate energy for all of them. So the more you entertain, the more it'll support it, but the energy is rather limited. But when you slowly slow down that thought, you know, and what happens is that when you touch here, when you put chandanam or kungumam or a vibhuti or other things, it gives a very cooling sensation. So for a short while, you see that that place is stimulated, and if the mind focuses there, you see that the mind slowly puts all the other thoughts in the background, and we see that, you know, our concentration improves. Concentration improving means that all the bandwidth that we have, the energy is now focused into one place. So the mind is now focused. In that focus, whatever one thought that you think about, you see that you understand it much more better and much more sharper. Somewhat like electron microscope, right? And we see that all the energy is there. The moment the light is focused in a particular place, you see that it becomes very, very powerful. In that same way, our mind is so dissipated And what these rituals teach you is to have focus, to help the mind focus, anchor. When it anchors to onto one thought, you see that the bandwidth is relieved, and we see that our mind becomes more sharper in whatever we think, including the thought of going deep down within ourselves. The mere fact that we spend a lot of energy to understand the material world, the material cosmos, when we focus it and channel it inside, we see that we understand that inner cosmos also in a much more deeper way. So there is a whole science of these rituals. Every rituals leads to the inner journey. And if you understand what that ritual is teaching you, you see that you have a better precision of what you're practicing. So I will give you some examples of this. So I talked about why this is very important. We also see that I'm not sure if you've seen that most saints would have, the circle up there, right? I mean, or the circle behind. And one would think, why would they put a circle on the saint or something behind? You see, and I wonder if all of you have thought about it. Why is that the case? You've seen it, but why is that the case? And the answer is very simple, actually. If you're practicing meditation, you see that here is very important, as I mentioned. This is also very important. This part is, as Swamiji says, that this is the crest eye. And if you slightly gently press that and you maintain that finger for about a few minutes, right, you start feeling the pulsation there. And as you start practicing that, you start seeing a swirling feeling, right? And that swirling feeling enables the mind to start concentrating there. And you see that whatever you're thinking outside starts focusing there. And there are important glands there that gives you a little bit more relaxing, calmness, coolness, important, hormones are released, and you feel more peaceful. So we see that, when you practice meditation, that's what Swamiji showed, you start feeling a swirling feeling. And that's what we see in many saints and sages, that the experience of that, vibration, electromagnetic field, because the brain is all wired up, with neural connection. So when that is stimulated, certain parts of brain really, are more stimulated than others. It channels a lot more electromagnetic field. So you feel that here, you feel it here, and more importantly, you also feel it in the back. And that's why sometimes, you see that in pictures they have saints because of the vibration, electromagnetic field. So we see that, as I said in previous, classes, the third eye, the crest eye, and the nape eye is very important in that meditational, because there is an important dynamics between awareness. There is an important understanding of what is embedded in all of us, through our memories. And the last one is here, where, you have a more universal idea. And by the way, you see that in all in some of the religious teachings, they speak about the third eye, very, very, and also this top eye, which is very important. So we see that, religious teachings gives us discipline. It enables us, if we do the complete journey from which achara to vichara, we see that we understand God, the concept of, ourselves and nature better. I'll give you another example of how this rituals play an important role. Another example is that I'm not sure if you have seen the light, the lamp. The often we have this lamp that we have in all our prayers. We have an earthen lamp. The earthen lamp is reflecting the body, right? And then we have the oil that enables us to, or we use the ghee, to enable the light to without that oil, we see that, it's the fuel that keeps the light going. And then you have that wick that is, dipped into that uh, oil or ghee, and we light the lamp, and we see that, the earthen body gives you that experience. The mind is the ghee that nourishes, and you see that the wick is essentially our intellect. And we see that the wick will light up when you have that experience and with the body. So we see that the sharira, the mind and intellect is very important to give us that enlightenment, and they both come together as one. You see, so enlightenment one experiences enlightenment through, at least in this material world, with the material body, with the fuel that is there, that is held by the earthen, uh, you know, um, you know, uh, container, and then we've got the wick, that essentially the theory we call it, and we light the lamp. And if you see, the light is, lit in such a way that if you see that the light follows a particular structure, and as long as the oil is there, you see that the light will burn. And as soon as the oil is finished, the light will also complete its journey. It becomes one. And we see that in all our lives, our mind plays an important role. And when it's fully experienced this material world, experience means although your body is there, when it's fully experienced, understand and enlightened, you see that you go back to that samadhi state ultimately. And we see this very clearly, that many great saints and sages, uh, when they've complete their journey, they see that I've finished everything, there is nothing more. And you see that they transition off. So the enlightened ones know that, like how one comes here, they live to outlive everything. The moment one has finished everything in this life, experience everything, and you see that they said there's nothing else to experience. I've attained all the enlightenment. Time for me to go back home. Go back home is essentially that samadhi state. Only an unenlightened mind will always fight to stay. Only an unenlightened mind that is not aware of this journey will try to hold on to everything. We can't. We have to, we have to outlive it. And this is what, the teachings are all about. We come here, we experience, we be enlightened, no regrets. We give our full thing. Ultimately, there comes a stage where we have to leave the body. And it has to, if we acquire this knowledge, we gracefully age and gracefully exit. You know, if we don't acquire this knowledge, we are fearful of death, we are fearful of disease, we are fearful of coronavirus, we are fearful of our shadows. And this is what this teaching gives us. Every moment of enlightenment and awareness gives us greater strength, stealth of the mind. Stealth of the mind means the strength of the mind to live, to outlive everything. And this is what the part of that, spiritual journey is. That, um, ultimately we are from the samadhi state, we experience for a short while, and we attain samadhi. The beautiful part of this journey is that while samadhi is in the beginning and the end, and that's what we think samadhi is, beginning and end, but actually an enlightened person, every moment is a samadhi moment. Every moment is a connected moment. Every moment is a moment where, Swamiji is meditation, meditation is Swamiji. And where it starts from understanding who you are, what nature is, and what God is, and continuously bringing the three together, ultimately becoming one. So you don't see, yourself separate from anything. So your thoughts, your speeches and your actions all become one. So this is what, the ultimate dualism will lead you to. It's that convergence while living, not, while, yes, when the body exists, you'll attain that samadhi. This is living samadhi. Santosham, I'll stop here.